Gururdevo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Om Ganana Antva Ganapatigam Mahe Kavin Kavinam Upavashravastramam Jostarajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspata Anushrundoti Viseda Sadhanam. Om Mahaganadipataye Namaha. Hari Om Keshvaya Namaha, Om Narayana Namaha, Om Madhvaya Namaha, Om Govindaya Namaha, Om Vishnuvaya Namaha, Matsudharaya Namaha, Trivikramaya Namaha, Vamanaya Namaha, Sridharaya Namaha, Hrishikeshaya Namaha, Namaha, Damodaraya Namaha, Sankarshnaya Namaha, Vasudevaya Namaha, Pradyumnaya Namaha, Aniruddhaya Namaha, Purushottamaya Namaha, Dokshaya Namaha, Narasimhaya Namaha, Achyutaya Namaha, Janadraya Namaha, Upaya Hare Namaha, Sri Krishnaya Namaha. Dear friends, we reach the 48th chapter of Bhagavata Purana, Dashamaskanda. So in that Dashamaskanda 48th chapter, Lord Krishna pleases his devotees. One is Kubje, otherwise called Trivikra, the lady who corrected her posture by Krishna lifting her chin and holding her feet, as I explained last time. And then he visits Akrura. The Lord sends Akrura to Hasthnapura to satisfy the Pandavas. After Uddhava had related to Sri Krishna the news of Raja, the Lord went to the home of Trivikra, otherwise called Kubja, which was decorated with diverse ornamentation conducive to sexual enjoyment. Trivikra welcomed Krishna with great respect, giving him a rice seat, and together with her female companions, worshipping him. She also offered Uddhava a seat as befitted his position, but Uddhava simply touched the seat and sat on the floor. Lord Krishna then reclined to an opulent bed as the maidservant Trivikra elaborately washed and decorated herself. Then she approached him. Krishna invited Kubja Trivikra to the bed and began to enjoy with her in various ways. By embracing Lord Krishna, Trivikra freed herself of the torment of lust. She asked Krishna to remain with her for some time, and the considerate Lord promised to fulfill her request in due course. He then returned with Uddhava to his residence. Apart from offering sandal paste to Krishna, Trivikra had never performed any pious acts. Yet simply on the strength of the piety of this single act as she attained the rare personal association of Lord Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna next went to Akrura's house with the Lord Baladeva and Uddhava. Akrura honored the three of them by bowing down and presenting them with suitable sitting places. Then he worshipped Rama, Balarqama and Krishna, washed their feet and poured the water on his head. Akrura also offered them many prayers. Lord Krishna was pleased with Akrura's prayers. He told him that since the Akrura was in fact their paternal uncle, Krishna and Balarqama should be the recipients of his protection and mercy. Lord Krishna then praised Akrura as a saint and a purifier of the sinful, and he asked him to visit Hasthnapura to find out how the Pandavas, deprived of their father, were faring. Finally, the Lord returned home, taking Balarqama and Uddhava with him. So this is the summary of this 48th chapter. Now we are going to start the shloka. Shuka uvacha ata vijnaya bhagavan sarvatma sarvadarshanaha swarendri sairendra kamataptaya priyamichan guhyayavu. Shuka Mahamani is telling Parikshit Maharaja. Next, after assimilating Uddhava's report, Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the omniscient soul of all that we desire to satisfy the serving girl Trivikra or Kubja, who was troubled by lust. Thus he went to her house. The text gives an interesting insight into the Lord's pastimes. The first line says, Ata Vijnaya Bhagavan. Thus the Lord, understanding Uddhava's report. The second line states that Lord Krishna is the soul of everything, Sarvatma, and the seer of everything, Sarvadarshanaha. In other words, although he certainly does not depend on spoken reports from messengers, he plays the part of the human being and listens to the news from a messenger, not out of need, as we would do, but in the bliss of his spiritual pastimes, exchanging love with his pure devotee. The word Sarva Darshana also indicates that the Lord perfectly understood the feelings of the residents of Vraja and was perfectly reciprocating with them within their hearts. Now, in his external pastimes, he desired to bless Sri Mati Trivikra, who was about to be freed from the disease of material lust. Trivikra's home was opulently appointed with expensive furnishings and replete with sensual accoutrements meant to inspire sexual desire. There were banners, rose strung pearls, canopies, fine beds and sitting places, and also fragrant incense, oil lamps, flower garlands, and aromatic sandalwood paste. According to Sridhara Swami, the sensual accoutrements in Trivikra's house included explicit sexual pictures. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti adds that her paraphernalia included herbal aphrodisiacs. It is not hard to guess Trivikra's intention at Lord Krishna went there to save her from material existence. When Trivikra saw him arriving at her house, she at once rose from her seat in a flurry. Coming forward graciously with her girlfriends, she respectfully greeted Lord Achyuta by offering him an excellent seat and other articles of worship. Uddhava also received a seat of honor since he was a saintly person, but he simply touched it and sat on the floor. Then Lord Krishna, imitating the manners of human society, quickly made himself comfortable on an opulent bed. According to the Acharyas, Uddhava felt reverence for his Lord and thus declined to sit on an opulent seat in his presence. Rather, he touched the seat with his hand and sat on the floor. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti adds that Lord Krishna made himself comfortable on a bed located in the inner chambers of Trivikra's home. Trivikra prepared herself by bathing, anointing her body, and dressing in fine garments, by putting on jewelry, garlands, perfume, and also by chewing betel nut, drinking fragrant liquor, and so on. She then approached Lord Mahadeva, with shyness, playful smiles, and coquettish glances. It is clear from this verse that the ways a woman prepares for sexual enjoyment have not changed in thousands of years. Calling forward his beloved, who was anxious and shy at the prospect of this new contact, the Lord pulled her by her bangled hands onto the bed. Thus he enjoyed with that beautiful girl whose only trace of piety was her having offered ointment, Sugandalepana, to the Lord Krishna. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti explains that the words Navasangama, Priya, indicate that Trivikra was in fact a virgin girl at this point. She had been deformed hunchback, and the Lord had recently transferred her into a beautiful girl. Therefore, although clearly lusting after Sri Krishna, she was naturally shy and anxious. Simply by smelling the fragrance of Krishna's lotus feet, Trivikra cleansed away the burning lust Cupid had aroused in her breast, chest, and eyes. With her two arms, she embraced between her breasts her lover, Sri Krishna, the personification of bliss, and thus she gave up her long-standing distress. Having thus gotten the hard to get Supreme Lord by simple act of offering him body ointments, Sugandalepana, unfortunate Trivikra submitted to that Lord of freedom the following request. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, Srimati Trivikra prayed to the Lord, please enjoy only with me and not with any other woman. Because Krishna was not prepared to grant such a benediction, Trivikra was described here as unfortunate. Sridhara Swami adds that although to ordinary eyes she seemed to beg for material sex pleasure, in fact she was a liberated soul at that point already. Trivikra said, "Oh beloved, please stay here with me for a few more days. and enjoy. I cannot bear to give up your association. O lotus-eyed one. The word ambu means water and ruha means rising. This ambruha means the lotus flower which rises up from the water. Lord Krishna is called Amburu Hekshana, the lotus-eyed one. He is the source of embodiment of all beauty, and naturally Trivikra was attracted to him. However, the Lord's beauty is spiritual and pure, and his intention was not to gratify himself with the Trivikra, but rather to bring her to the point of pure spiritual existence, Krishna consciousness. Promising her the fulfillment of this lusty desire, considerate Krishna, Lord of all beings, paid Trivikra his respects and then returned with Uddhava to his own supremely opulent residence. All the acharyas agree that the words Kama Varam Dattva indicate that Lord Krishna promised Trivikra he would fulfill her lusty desires. Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Lord of all lords, is ordinarily difficult to approach. One who has properly worshipped him and then chooses the benediction of mundane sense gratification is certainly of a poor intelligence, for he is satisfied with an insignificant result. It is clear from the commencement of the Acharyas that the story of Dwarka is to be understood on two levels. On the one hand, she is understood to be a liberated soul already before coming to reach Krishna, directly associating with the Lord Krishna and participating in his pastimes. On the other hand, her conduct is clearly meant to teach a lesson about what not to do in relation with Lord Krishna. Since all the Lord's pastimes are not only blissful but also didactic, there is no real contradiction in this pastime, since Trivikra's purity and her bad example takes place on two distinct levels. Arjuna is also considered a pure devotee, and by initially disobeying Krishna's instruction to fight, he also showed an example of what not to do. However, such bad examples always have happy endings in the blissful association of absolute truth, Lord Sri Krishna. Then Lord Krishna, wanting to have some things done, went to Akrura's house with Balarqama and Kubje, also desired to please Akrura. The previous incident of Lord Krishna's visit to Trivikra's house and now his visit to Akrura's gives a fascinating glimpse into the daily activities of Sri Krishna in Mathura city. Own relatives, after embracing them and greeting them, Akrura bowed down to Krishna and Balarqama and was greeted by them in return. Then, when his guest had points out that Lord Krishna and the others approached Akrura in a friendly attitude. At first, Akrura reciprocated that friendly mood, and then, in the course of showing them hospitality, he adopted his natural devotional attitude toward the Lord Krishna and thus offered his obeisances to Sri Krishna and Balarqama. O King, Akrura bathed the feet of Lord Krishna and Lord Balarqama and then poured the bath water on his head. He presented them with the gifts of fine clothing, aromatic and sandalwood paste, flower garlands, and excellent jewelry. After thus worshipping the two lords, he bowed his head to the floor. He then began to massage Lord Krishna's feet, placing them on his lap, and with his head bowed in humility, he addressed Krishna and Balarqama as follows. Akrura said, "It is our good fortune that you two lords have killed the evil Kamsa and his followers, thus delivering your dynasty from the endless suffering and causing it to flourish. You both are the original Supreme Person, the cause of the universe and its very substance, not the slightest subtle cause or manifest product of creation exists apart from you." After praising Krishna and Balarqama for having saved their dynasty, Akrura now points out that the Lord actually has no mundane connection with any social and political institution. He is the original personality of Godhead, performing his pastimes for the benefit of the entire universe. O Supreme Absolute Truth, With your personal energies, you create this universe and then enter into it. Thus, one can perceive you in many different forms, or by hearing from authorities and by direct experience. The grammatical agreement of Shruta Pratyaksha Gocharanam in the neutral case with Atma Atma Atmastrastam Idam Vishwam indicates that Supreme Lord, by entering his creation and his potencies, make himself perceivable within the universe. Throughout the Bhagavatam and other authorized Vedic literatures, we often find descriptions of the Lord's simultaneous supremacy over all other things and his identity with them. We cannot reasonably draw any other conclusion from Vedic literature than the one powerfully preached by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Achintya Behade Behade Tattva. Achintya Beda Beda Tattva. That is, the absolute truth is greater than and distinct from everything, since he is the omnipotent creator and controller of all, and simultaneously one with everything, since all that exists is the expansion of his own power. Throughout these chapters of Srimad Bhagavatam, we also observe one of the unequal extraordinary features of this great work. Whether Krishna is sending his message to the gopis or accepting the prayers of Akrura, there is a constant philosophical discussion. Throughout the Bhagavatam, the steady combination of fascinating pastimes with persistent spiritual philosophy is an extraordinary feature. We are allowed to glimpse and even to relish the spiritual emotions of the Lord Krishna and his liberated associates, and yet we are constantly reminded of their ontological position, lest we lapse into a cheap anthropomorphic vision. Thus, it is entirely in character with the work that Akrura, in his ecstasy, glorifies the Lord with the precise philosophical prayers. Just as the primary elements earth and so on, manifest themselves in abundant variety among all the species of mobile and immobile life, so you, the one independent supreme soul, appear to be manifold among the variegated objects of your creation. You create, destroy, and also maintain this universe with your personal energies, the modes of passion, ignorance, and goodness, yet you are never entangled by these modes or the attractivities and activities they generate. Since you are the original source of all knowledge, what could ever cause you to be bound by illusion? The phrase Jnanatmasaste keva cha banda hetuhu. Since you are constituted of knowledge, what could be a cause of bondage for you? Definitely indicates the obvious that the omniscient supreme God is never in illusion. Therefore, the impersonalistic theory that we are all God but have forgotten and are now in illusion is refuted here in the passage of Srimad Bhagavatam. Impersonalistic theory that we are all God but have forgotten and are not and are now in illusion is refuted here in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam. Since it has never been demonstrated that you are covered by material bodily designations, it must be concluded that for you there is neither birth in an internal literal sense nor any duality. Therefore, you never undergo bondage or liberation. And if you appear to, it is only because of your desire that we see you in that way, or simply because of our lack of discrimination. Here Akrura states two reasons why the Lord appears to be covered by a material form or to take birth like a human being. First, when Lord Krishna executes his pastimes, his loving devotees think of him as their beloved child, friend, or lover, and so on. In the ecstasy of this loving reciprocation, they do not think of Krishna as God. For example, because of our extraordinary love for him, Mother Yashoda worries that Krishna will be injured in the forest. That she feels this way is the desire of the Lord, which is here indicated by the word Nikama. The second reason the Lord may appear material is indicated by the word Aviveka, simply because of ignorance, a lack of discrimination. One may misunderstand the position of the personality of Godhead. In the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, in the Lord Krishna's discussion with Sri Uddhava, the Lord elaborately discusses his transcendental position beyond bondage and liberation. As stated in Vedic literature, Deha Dehi Vibhago Yama Nasarve Vidyate Kvachit. There is never distinction of body and soul in the Supreme Lords. In other words, Sri Krishna's body is eternal, spiritual, omniscient, and reservoir of all pleasure. You originally enunciated the ancient religious path of Vedas for the benefit of the whole universe. Whenever that path becomes obstructed by wicked persons following the path of atheism, you assume one of your incarnation, and which are all transcendental mode of goodness. You are that very same Supreme Person, my Lord, and you have now appeared in the home of Vasudeva with your plenary portion. You have done this to relieve the earth's burden by killing hundreds of armies led by kings who are expansions of the demigods' enemies. You have done this to relieve the earth's burden by killing the hundreds of armies led by the kings who are expansions of the God's enemies, and also to spread the fame of our dynasty. The term Suretrashrama Ranjanam indicates that the demonic kings slain by Krishna were in fact expansion or incarnation of the enemies of the gods. This fact is elaborately explained in Mahabharata, which reveals the specific identities of the demonic kings. Today, O Lord, my home has become most fortunate because you have entered it. As the supreme truth, you embody the forefathers, ordinary creatures, human beings, and gods, and the water that has washed your feet purifies the three worlds. Indeed, O transcendent one, you are the spiritual master of the universe. Sridhara Swami has nicely interpreted Akrura's feelings as follows. Akrura said, my Lord, although I am a householder today, my home has become more pious than the forest where sages perform austerities. Why? Because simply you have entered my home. Indeed, you are the personification of the deities who preside over the 5 sacrificial sacrifices a householder must perform daily to atone for unavoidable violence committed to living beings in the home. You are the spiritual truth behind all these creations, and now you have entered my home. That's why my house is purified. The 5 daily sacrifices enjoined by the householder are sacrifice to the Brahman studying the Vedas, sacrifice to the forefathers by making offerings to them, sacrifice to all creatures by putting aside a portion of one meal, sacrifice to the human beings by extending hospitality, and sacrifice to the gods by performing fire sacrifices, and so on. So the 5 daily sacrifices enjoined by a householder are sacrifice to the Brahman and by studying the Vedas. If you study Vedas, you then your sacrifice to the Brahman. Sacrifice to the forefathers by making offerings to the forefathers. In other words, it's called Brahma Yajna. Studying Veda, sacrificing Brahman is Brahma Yajna. Sacrifice to the forefathers by making offers to them is Pitru Yajna. Sacrifice to all creatures and putting aside a portion of one's meals is Bhuta Yajna. Sacrifice to the human beings by extending hospitality, and sacrifice to the gods by performing fire sacrifice, doing yajna or yaga in sacrifices in favor of Lord Krishna or Lord Narayana, and so on. These are the 5 type of yajnas and sacrifices is mentioned here. What learned person would approach anyone but you for shelter. When you are the affectionate, grateful, and truthful well-wishers of your devotees to those who worship you in sincere friendship, you reward everything they desire. You award them what worship in sincere worship. You reward everything what they desire, even your own self. Yet you never increase or diminish. The verse describes that both the Lord and his devotees as Suruda, well-wishers. Suruda. The Lord is the well-wisher of his devotees, and the devotees lovingly desires all happiness for the Lord. Even in this world, an excess of love may sometimes produce unnecessary solicitude. For example, we often observe that a mother's loving concern for her adult child is not always justified by actual danger to the child. A grown child may be wealthy, competent, and healthy, and yet the mother's loving concern continues. Similarly, a pure devotee always feels loving concerns for Lord Krishna, as exemplified by Mother Yashoda, who could only think of Krishna as her beautiful son. Lord Krishna had promised Akrura that after killing Kamsa, he would visit his home, and now the Lord kept his promise. Akrura recognizes this and glorifies the Lord as Ritugraha, Ritugira, one who is true to his word. Ritigraha. The Lord is Kritajna, grateful for whatever little worship a devotee offers, and even if the devotee forgets, the Lord does not. It is by our great fortune, Janardana, that you are now visible to us. For even the masters of yoga and the foremost gods can achieve this goal only with a great difficulty. Please quickly cut the ropes of our illusory attachment for children, wife, wealth, influential friends, home, and body. All such attachment is simply the effect of your illusory material energy. Shuka Maharshi says to Parikshit, thus worshipped and fully glorified by his devotee, the Akrura, the Supreme Lord Hari smilingly addressed Akrura, completely charming him with his words. Bhagavan Vacha says, Tvam no Guru Pitruvascha Jyago Shlagyo Bandhuscha Nityada Vayam Turaksha Postascha Anukampya Prajahimaha. Supreme Lord said, you are our spiritual master, paternal uncle, and praiseworthy friend, and we are like your sons, always dependent on your protection, sustenance, and compassion. That's what Akrura said to, so Lord Krishna says to Akrura. Exalted souls like you are the true objects of service and the most worshipable authorities for those who desire the highest good in life. Gods are generally concerned with their own interest, but saintly devotees never are. Whereas the gods may award material benefit, saintly devotees of the Lord have the power to award the real perfection of the life, Krishna consciousness. Thus, Lord Krishna reinforces the respectful mode he has adopted here toward his uncle Akrura. No one can deny that there are holy places with sacred rivers, or that the gods appear in deity forms made of earth and stone. But these purify the soul only after a long time, whereas saintly persons purify just by being seen. You are indeed the best of our friends, so please go to Hasthnapura and as the well-wisher of the Pandavas, find out how they are doing. In Sanskrit, the imperative you go may be rendered by gachasva or gacha. In the second of these cases, the word following gacha means swa, which is taken in the vocative sense, indicates Krishna addressing Akrura as our own. This is in reference to the Lord Krishna's intimate relationship with his uncle. We have heard that when their father passed away, the young Pandavas were brought with their anguished mother to the capital city by King Dhrutharstra. and that they are now living with there. Indeed, weak-minded Dhrutharstra, the son of Ambika, has come under the control of his wicked sons, and therefore that blind king is not treating his brother's sons fairly. Go and see whether Dhrutharstra is acting properly or not. When we found out, we will make necessary arrangements to help our dear friends. Ittakrooram samadhisya bhagavan haririshwaraha sankarshanodbhavabhyam vaitata swabhavanam yayau. Shukra Maharshi is telling, thus fully instructing Akrura, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, then returned to his residence accompanied by Lord Sankarshana, is otherwise called Balarqama and Uddhava. Thus end the purport of 48th chapter ends. Thus ends the purports of the humble servants of His Divine Grace, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, to the 10th canto, 48th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Krishna Pleases His Devotees, Akrura and Kubje. Now we come to the 49th chapter, Akrura's mission to Hasthnapura. Akrura goes to Hasthnapura as per the Lord Krishna's instruction. In the 49th chapter, Akrura went to Hasthnapura to see Dhritarashtra's unfair behavior toward his nephews, the Pandavas, and then returned to Mathura. On the order of Lord Krishna, Akrura went to Hasthnapura, where he met the Kauravas and Pandavas, and then set about to find out how Dhritarashtra was treating the latter. This task would keep Akrura in Hasthinapura for several months. Vidura and Kunti Devi described to Akrura in detail how Dhritarashtra's envious and exalted qualities of the Pandavas had tried to destroy them by various evil means, and were contemplating further atrocities. With tearful eyes, Kunti Devi asked Akrura, with tearful eyes, Kunti is asking Akrura, do my parents and other relatives headed by Krishna and Balarqama ever think of me and my sons? And will Krishna ever come to console us in our distress? Then Kunti Devi began to chant Lord Krishna's names for her protection, and she also chanted mantras expressing surrender to him. Akrura assured Kunti Devi, since your sons were born from gods like Dharma and Vayu, there is no reason to expect that any misfortune will befall them. Rather, you should be confident that very soon they will receive the greatest possible good fortune. Akrura then delivered to Dhritarashtra the message from Krishna and Balarqama. Akrura told the king Dhritarashtra, you assumed the royal throne after the death of the Pandu. Seeing all equally, which is the religious duty of kings, you should protect all your subjects and personal relations, such as fair between you will gain all fame and good fortune. But if you act otherwise, you will attain only infamy in this life and condemnation to a hellish existence in the next. A living being takes his birth all alone, and alone he gives up his life. Alone he enjoys the fruits of his piety and son. If one fails to understand the true identity of the self and instead maintains his progeny by indulging in evil deeds to other people, then surely he will go to hell. One should therefore learn to understand the unsteadiness of material existence, which is like a sleeper's dream, a magician's illusion, or a flight of fancy, and should thus control his mind in order to remain peaceful. And to this, Dhritarashtra replied, I cannot hear enough of your beneficial words of Akrura, which are like the sweet nectar of immortality. But because the tight knot of affection for my sons has made me biased toward them. Your statements cannot become fixed within my mind. No one can transgress the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. His purpose for descending into the Yadu dynasty will inevitably be fulfilled. Knowing how the mentality of Dhrutharstra, Akrura took permission from his dear relatives and friends, returned to Mathura, where he related everything to Lord Krishna and Lord Balarqama. So now this sloka starts. That's a summary what I told this for this chapter. Shrikovacha, Shukamarshi is telling Parishit Raja, Sagatva Hastinapuram, Pauramendro Yashonkitam, Dadarsha Tatra Ambikeyam, Sabishtam Pratam, Sahaputrancha Baklikam, Bharadwajam Sagautamam, Karnam Surodanam, Draunim Panduvan, Surdopadan, Surdoparan. Shukamarshi is telling, Akrura went to Hasthnapura, the city distinguished of the glory of the Pandu Paurava rulers. Glory of the Pururava rulers. There he saw Dhrutharstra, Bhishma, Vidura and Kunti, along with Bhalika and his son Somadatta. He also saw Dronacharya, Kripacharya, Karna, Duryodhana, Ashwatthama, the Pandavas and other close friends. After Akrura, the son of Gandhiri, had appropriately greeted all his relatives and friends, they asked him for news of their family members and he remained in Hasthinapura for several months to scrutinize the conduct of the weak-willed king who had bad sons and who was inclined to give into the whims of mischievous advisors. Tej Auja Balam Viryam Tej Ojo Balam Virya Prashnayadim Chastudgunan Prajanuragam Parteshu Na Sadbishchikirsitam Na Sadbushchikirsitam. Kunti and Vidura described Akrura. Kunti and Vidura described to Akrura in detail the evil intentions of Dhrutharashtra's sons, who could not tolerate the great qualities of Kunti's sons, such as their powerful influence, military skill, physical strength, bravery, and humility, or the intense affection the citizens had for them. Kunti and Vidura also told Akrura about how the sons of Dhrutharashtra had tried to poison the Pandavas and carry out other such plots. Kunti and Vidura also told Akrura about how the sons of Dhrutharstra had tried to poison the Pandavas and carry out other such plots. Kunti Devi, taking the advantage of her brother Akrura's visit, approached him confidentially while remembering her birthplace. She spoke with tears in her eyes. Does my nephew Krishna, the Supreme Personality and the compassionate shelter of his devotees, still remember his aunt's sons? And does lotus-eyed Rama remember them also? So Kunti is asking this to Akrura. Now that I am suffering in the midst of my enemies like a doe in the midst of wolves, will Krishna come to console me and my fatherless sons with his words? Krishna, Krishna, O great yogi, O supreme soul and protector of the universe, O Govinda, please protect me. Who will surrender to me? Who have surrendered to you? I and my sons are being overwhelmed by trouble. Since Lord Krishna maintains the entire universe, thought Kunti Devi, surely he can protect our family. The word Avasidittam indicates that Kunti Devi was overwhelmed by troubles. Thus exhausted, she was helplessly taking shelter of Sri Krishna in her prayers In the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Kunti admits that all these troubles were actually a blessing, for they forced her to always be intensely Krishna consciousness. For persons fearful of death, and rebirth, I see no shelter other than your liberating lotus feet, for you are the Supreme Lord. I offer my obeisances unto you, Krishna, the Supreme Pure, the Absolute Truth and Super Soul, the Lord of pure devotional service and the sources of all knowledge. I have come to you for shelter. Sridhar Swami has translated the word Yogaya as unto Krishna, the source of knowledge. The word yoga indicates connection and also the means to achieve something. As conscious souls, we have a connection with the Supreme Soul through bhakti or devotion, through the relationship of experience, perfect knowledge, and the Supreme Soul. Since the Supreme Soul is the absolute truth, perfect knowledge of Him means perfect knowledge of everything. As stated in the Mukunda Munduka Upanishad, Yasmin through that relationship, we experience the perfect knowledge of the Supreme Soul. Since the Supreme Soul is the absolute truth, perfect knowledge of Him means perfect knowledge of everything. As stated in the Munduka Upanishad, Yasmin Vijnate Sarvam Eva Vijnatam Bhavati. When the absolute is understood, everything is understood. Thus, Lord Krishna Himself, by His spiritual potency, establishes our connection with Him, and that connection is the source of all spiritual knowledge. Thus, Acharya Sridhara Swami, by his thoughtful translation, stimulates us to deeper understanding of Krishna consciousness today. Thus, Acharya Sridhara Swami, by his thoughtful translation, stimulates us to deeper understanding of Krishna consciousness philosophy. Shukha Maharshi said to Parikshit Maharaj, thus meditating on our family members and also on Krishna, the Lord of universe, your great grandmother Kunti Devi began to cry out in grief, O king. Both Akrura, who shared Queen Kunti's distress and happiness, and the illustrious Vidura consoled the queen by reminding her of the extraordinary way her sons had taken birth. Akrura and Vidura reminded Queen Kunti that her sons were born of heavenly gods and thus could not be vanquished like ordinary mortals. In fact, an extraordinary victory awaited this most pious family. The ardent affection King Dhrutharstra felt for his sons had made him act unjustly toward the Pandavas. Just before leaving, Akrura approached the king, who was seated among the friends and supporters, and related to him the message that his relatives, Lord Krishna and Lord Brahma, had sent out for friendship. Akrura said, O my dear son, Vichitravirya, O enhancer of the Kuru's glory, your brother Pandu having passed away, you have now assumed the royal throne. Akrura was speaking ironically, since the young sons of Pandu should actually have been occupying the throne. Upon the death of the Pandu, they were too young to immediately govern and so were put in Dhritarashtra's care. But now a sufficient time had passed and their legitimate rights should have been recognized. By religiously protecting the earth, delighting your subjects with your noble characters and treating all your relatives equally, you will surely achieve success and glory. अन्यथा त्वाचरणं लोके गर्हितो यास्यसे से तमः तस्मात् समत्वे वर्थस्य पाण्डवेष्वात्मजेषु च. If you act otherwise, however, people will condemn you in this world and in the next life. You will enter the darkness of the hell. Remain equally disposed, therefore, toward Pandu's sons and your own. Dhritarashtra's whole problem was his excessive attachment to his nasty sons. That was the fatal flaw that caused his downfall. There was no lack of good advice from all sides, and Dhritarashtra even admitted that the advice was sound, but he could not follow it. One can have clear, practical intelligence when the mind and heart are pure. In this world, no one has any permanent relation with anyone else. O king, we cannot stay forever, even with our own body. And to speak of our wife, children, and the rest. Every creature is born alone and dies alone, and alone one experiences the just rewards of his good and evil deeds. The term anubhunakte is significant here. Bhunakte means the living being, experiences, and anu means following or in sequence. In other words, we experience happiness and distress according to the moral and spiritual. The term Anubhunkte is significant here. Bhukte means the living being, experiences, and anu means following or in sequence. In other words, we experience happiness and distress according to the moral and spiritual quality of our activities. Karma bandhana. So whatever the karma we are doing, it reflects on the blessings of Lord Krishna. We are responsible for what we do. This is very important. All the devotees should understand that we are responsible for what we do. Dhritarashtra was falsely and obsessively attached to his evil-minded sons, forgetting that he alone would have to suffer for his imprudent behavior. Adharmopajitam vittam harantainyela alpamedasah sambodhaniya padesharja jalaneva jalaukusaha. In the guise of dear dependents, strangers steal the sinfully acquired wealth of a foolish man, just as the offspring of a fish drink up the water that sustains the fish. Ordinary people feel they cannot live without their wealth, although their possession of it is circumstantial and temporary. Just as wealth gives life to an ordinary man, water gives life to the fish. One is dear dependent, one is dear dependents, however, steal one's wealth, just as a fish offspring drink up the water sustaining the fish. In the words of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, this world is a weird alone. A fool indulges in sin to maintain his life, wealth, and children, and other relatives, for he thinks, these things are mine. In the end, however, these very things are abandoned him, leaving him frustrated. In these verses, Akrura is giving rather frank advice to Dhritarashtra. Those who know the story of Mahabharata will realize how relevant and prophetic these instructions are, and how much Dhritarashtra suffered for not accepting them. Although one tenaciously clings to his property, in the end of all is lost, and the blundering soul is swept away by the wheel of birth and death. Abandoned by his so-called dependents, ignorant of actual goal of life, indifferent to his real duty, and having failed to fulfill his purposes, the foolish soul enters the blindness of hell, taking his sinful reactions with him. It is sadly ironic that materialistic persons who labor so assiduously to accumulate insurance, security, property, and family enter the darkness of hell equipped with nothing but the painful reactions of their sons. While apparently neglecting accumulated property, a large so on, enter the next life of enriched with many spiritual assets and thus enjoyed the deep. On the other hand, those who cultivate Krishna consciousness, spiritual life, while apparently neglecting the accumulated property, a large family, and so on, enter the next life encircled, enriched with many spiritual assets, and thus enjoy the deep pleasures of the soul. Therefore, O king, looking upon this world as a dream, a magician's illusion, or a flight of fancy, please control your mind with intelligence and become equipoised and peaceful, my Lord. Dhrutharstra uvacha यथा वदति कल्याणी वाचं दानपते भवान् तथा नया नृत्कप्यामि मर्त्यः प्राप्य यथामृतम्. O Master of Charity, I can never be satiated while hearing your auspicious words. Indeed, I am like a mortal who has obtained the nectar of the gods, nectar of the gods. In the opinion of Sri Krishna Chakravarti, Dhrutharstra was in fact proud and felt he already knew everything Akrura was speaking, but to maintain the diplomatic gravity, he spoke. Even so, gentle Akrura, because my unsteady heart is prejudiced by affection for my sons, these pleasing words of yours cannot remain fixed there, just as lightning cannot remain fixed in a cloud. Who can defy the injunctions of the Supreme Lord, who has now descended in the Yadu dynasty to diminish the earth's burden? Akrura says, who can defy the injunctions of the Supreme Lord, who has now descended in the Yadu dynasty to diminish the earth's burden? Naturally, we would like to ask Dhrutharstra, if you know all this, why don't you behave properly? Of course, this is exactly Dhritarashtra's point of, he feels that these events have already been set in motion. He is helpless to change them. In fact, events have been set in motion by his attachment and sinful propensities, and therefore he should have taken responsibility for his own acts. The Lord Krishna clearly states in Bhagavad Gita, Nadatte Kaschit Papam. The Supreme Lord does not accept responsibility for anyone's sinful activities. It is dangerous policy to claim that we are acting improperly because of destiny or flat. We should take up Krishna consciousness seriously and Lord's pastimes are not only entertaining but also didactic. And the lesson here is that Dhritarashtra should have acted properly. This is what the Lord wanted to teach him a lesson. Dhritarashtra claims that Krishna came to relieve the burden of the earth, but the earth's burden is precisely the improper behavior of its inhabitants. So let us take the lesson the Lord wants to teach here and be instructed for our benefit. Yo durvi marshapataya nijamayeedaham srushva gunan vibhajate tadanu pravishtaha tasme namo durama bodha vihara tantra samsara chakragataye parameshwaraya I offer my obeisances to him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, who creates this universe by the inconceivable activity of his material energy and then distributes. Lord Akrura says, I offer my obeisances to him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who creates this universe by the inconceivable activity of his material energy and then distributes the various modes of nature by entering within the creation. From him, the meaning of whose pastimes is unfathomable, come both the containing cycle of birth and death and places of worship. When all is said and done, Dhrutharstra was not an ordinary person, but an associate of Supreme Lord Krishna. Certainly, an ordinary person could not offer such a learned hymn to the Lord. Shukovacha ityabhipretye nrpaterabhiprayam sayadavaha sumrudbhi samanojñataha punayaduparimagat. Sukumarshi is telling Parikshit Raj, having thus apprised himself by the king's attitude, Akrura, the descendant of Yadu, took permission from his well-wishing relatives and friends and returned to the capital of the Yadavas, that is Mathura. Shashamsa Ramakrishnagupta Dhrutharstra vicheshtitam Pandavan prati Kauravya edartam praishitam swayam. Akrura reported to the Lord Balarqama and Lord Krishna how Dhrutharstra was behaving towards the Pandavas. Thus, O descendant of the Kauravas, who fulfilled the purpose for which he had been sent. In the next chapter, thus end the purports of the humble servants of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. At the end of 49th chapter, Iti Srimad Bhagavate Purane Mahapurane Paramahamsam Samhitayam Dashamaskande Purvarde Ekona Panchashtottamo. So that ends the 10th canto altogether. That the Purvarda, the first half of the 10th canto is finished. The second half of the Dashamaskanda canto is going to start from now. Jarasandha Yuddha Dwarka Pattanada Nirmana. The Krishna established the city of Dwarka in this next chapter 50. This chapter relates how Lord Krishna defeated Jarasandha 17 times in battle and then constructed the city of Dwarka. After Kamsa was killed, his two queens, Asti and Prapti, went to the home of their father Jarasandha and sorrowfully described to him how Krishna had made them widows. Upon hearing this account, King Jarasandha became angry upon Lord Krishna. He vowed to rid the earth of all the Yadavas, and he gathered an immense army to lay siege to the Mathura. When Sri Krishna saw Jarasandha attacking the Lord, considered the reasons for his descent to this world, and then decided to destroy Jarasandha's army, which was a burden to the earth. Two effulgent chariots suddenly appear, equipped with the drivers and furnishings, together with all the Lord's personal weapons. Seeing this, Lord Krishna addressed Lord Baladeva, my dear brother Jarasandha is now attacking Mathurapuri. So please mount your chariot and let us go destroy the enemies of army. The two lords took up their weapons, mounted their chariots, and went forth from the city. When Lord Krishna came before his opponent's army, he sounded his conch shell, striking a fear into his enemies' hearts. King Jarasandha surrounded Krishna and Balarama with his soldiers, chariots, and so on. and the women of the city, having climbed up to the roof of the palaces, became extremely unhappy because they could not see the lords. Then Krishna twanged his bow and started to rain down a torrent of arrows upon the enemy soldiers. Soon Jarasandha's unfathomable army had been annihilated. Then Lord Baladeva arrested Jarasandha and was about to bind him up with the ropes when Sri Krishna and Balarama Sri Krishna had Baladeva release the king. Lord Balarama, Krishna is asking Balarama to release the king. Lord Krishna reasoned that Jarasandha would assemble another army and return again to fight. This would facilitate Krishna's goal of removing the earth's burden. Released Jarasandha returned to Magadha Desha and vowed to perform austerities with the aim of avenging his defeat. The other kings advised him that his defeat was only a reaction of his karma. Thus informed King Jarasandha withdrew to his kingdom with his heavy heart. Sri Krishna rejoined the citizens of Mathura, who began to rejoicing, singing songs of triumph and arranging victory celebrations. The Lord brought all the warriors' jewelry and ornaments that had been picked up from the battlefield and presented them to Maharaja Ugrasena. Jarasandha attacked the Yadavas in Mathura 17 times. Jarasandha attacked the Yadavas in Mathura 17 times, and each time his armies were totally destroyed. Then, as Jarasandha prepared to attack for the 18th time, a warrior named Kalayavana, who had been searching for a worthy opponent, was sent by Narada Muni to fight the Yadavas with 30 million soldiers. Then, as Jarasandha prepared to attack for the 18th time, a warrior named Kalayavana, who had been searching for a worthy opponent, was sent by Narada Muni to fight the Yadavas. With 30 million soldiers, Kalayavana laid siege to the Yadava capital, Mathura. Lord Krishna looked upon this attack with concern, for he knew that the Jarasandha arrival imminent. There was a serious danger that the Jarasandha attacked the Yadavas in Mathura 17 times, and each time his armies were totally destroyed by Lord Krishna and Balaram. Then, as Jarasandha prepared to attack for the 18th time, a warrior named Kalayavana, who had been searching for a worthy opponent, was sent by Narada Muni to fight the Yadavas. With their 30 million soldiers, Kalayavana laid siege to the Yadava capital. Lord Krishna looked upon this attack with concern, for he knew that with Jarasandha's arrival imminent, there was a serious danger that the simultaneous attack of these two enemies might endanger the Yadavas. Therefore, the Lord constructed a wonderful city within the sea of a safe haven for the Yadavas. Then he brought them all there by his mystic power. The city was fully populated with members of all four social orders, and within it, no one felt the pangs of thirst and hunger. The various gods, headed by Indra, each offered as a tribute to Lord Krishna the same opulences they had originally obtained from him to establish their positions of austerity. Once he saw his subjects were safely settled, Lord Krishna took permission from Lord Balarama and went out to Mathura unarmed. So this is the summary of the 50th chapter of Dashamaskanda, that is started the second half of the Dashamaskanda. Shukovacha Hastihi Praptischa Kamsasya Mahisho Bharatarshavaha Mrutair Bhartari Durkharte Yutusma Pitur Grihan. Shuka Maharshi is telling Parikshit Maharaj, when Kamsa was killed, O heroic descendant of Bharata, his two queens, Asti and Prapti, went to their father Jarasandha's house in great distress. And they told him that because of Krishna, they became widows. The sorrowful queens told their father, King Jarasandha of Magadha, all about how they had become widows. Hearing this, odious news of King Jarasandha was filled with sorrow and angry, and he began the greatest possible endeavor to rid the earth of the Pandavas. With a fierce of 23 Akshohini divisions of army, he laid siege to the Yadu capital Mathura on all sides. The numbers involved in an Akshohini division are given in the word meaning. An Akshohini was standard fighting force in ancient times. Although Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the original cause of all this world, when he descended to the earth, he played the role of a human being. Thus, when he saw Jarasandha's assembled army surrounding his city like a great ocean, overflowing its shores, and when he saw how this army was striking fear into his objects, the Lord considered what is suitable response should be according to the time, place, and specific purpose of his current incarnation. The Acharyas point out that the Supreme Godhead did not have to worry about mortal attack from Jarasandha and his soldiers. But as stated here, Sri Krishna was playing the part of a human being, Karanamanusha, and he played the part well. This play is called Leela, the Lord's enactment of spiritual pastimes for the pleasure of his devotees, although ordinary persons may be dumbfounded by the Lord's pastimes. The devotees derive tremendous pleasure from his inimitable style of behavior. Thus, Srila Sridhara Swami points out that Sri Krishna thought as follows: how should I defeat Jarasandha? Should I kill this army but not Jarasandha? And should I kill Jarasandha and take the army for myself? Or perhaps I should just kill both of them? Lord Krishna's conclusion is described in the following verse. The Supreme Lord Krishna thought, since it is such a burden on the earth, the biggest army, I will destroy Jarasandha's army only, consisting of Akshohinis of foot soldiers, horses, chariots, and elephants, which King Magadha has assembled from all subservient kings and brought together here. But Jarasandha himself should not be killed, since in the future he will certainly assemble another army. After due consideration, Lord Krishna decided that since he had descended to the earth to destroy the demons, and since Jarasandha was so enthusiastic to bring all the demons to the Lord's front door, it was definitely more efficient to keep Jarasandha alive and busy so that he can bring so many people and all those people can be attacked. This is the purpose of my present incarnation, to relieve the earth of its burden, protect the pious and kill the impious. I will assume other bodies to protect religion and to end the religion whenever it flourishes in the course of time. That's what Krishna decided himself. Shukra Maharshi is telling, as Lord Govinda was thinking in this way, two chariots as effulgent in the sun, as the sun suddenly descended from the sky. They were complete with drivers and equipment. Srila Jiva Goswami and Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti agree that the chariots came down from the Lord's own abode, Vaikuntaloka, the kingdom of God. The faithful devotees of the Lord derive tremendous pleasure by observing the Lord's incomparable technology. Lord's eternal divine weapons also appeared before him spontaneously. Seeing these, Lord Krishna and of the senses addressed Lord Sankarshana, the Balarama. Supreme Lord Krishna said, my respected elder brother Balarama, see this danger which has beset your dependents, the Yadus, and see, dear master, how your personal chariot and favorite weapons have come before you, the purpose for which we have taken birth. My Lord is to secure the welfare of our devotees. Please now remove from the earth the burden of these 23 armies, 23 Akshohini armies. After Lord Krishna had thus invited his brother Balarama, the two Dasaras, Krishna and Balarama, wearing armor and displaying their resplendent weapons, drove out of the city in their chariots. Only a very small contingent of soldiers. As Lord Krishna came out of the city with Dwarka at the reins of his chariot, he blew his conch shell, and the enemy soldiers' hearts began to tremble with fear. Jarasandha looked at the two of them and said, "O Krishna, lowest of men, I do not wish to fight alone with you, since it would be a shame to fight with a mere boy. You fool who keep yourself hidden. O murderer of your relatives, go away. I will not fight with you." Srila Sridhara Swami has interpreted Jarasandha's words as follows. Purasadhama. Purasadhama can be understood as Purusha Adhama Yasmat, meaning Krishna to whom all men are inferior. In other words, here Lord Krishna is being addressed as Purushottama, best of living beings. Similarly, the word Guptena, hidden, indicates Lord Krishna's aspect of being in everyone's heart and invisible to material vision. The words Tvaya Manda can also be divided into, according to Sanskrit grammar, as Tvaya Amanda. In this case, Jarasandha is indicating that Krishna is not foolish, but rather most alert. The word Bandhu was used by Jarasandha in the sense of relative. Since Lord Krishna killed his maternal uncle Kamsa, however, Bandhu comes from the verb bandha, to bind, and therefore Bandhu Han can be understood as one who destroys the bondage of the ignorance. Similarly, the word Yahi, please go, indicates that Lord Krishna should approach the living beings and bless them to become Krishna consciousness. You, Balarama, should gather your courage and fight with me. If you think you can do it, you may either give up your body when it is cut out to pieces by my arrows, and thus attain to heaven, or else kill me. According to Acharya Sridhara Swamiji, Jarasandha suspected that Lord Balarama's body was indestructible, and thus he offered that what might be a more practical alternative, that Balarama kill Jarasandha. Supreme Lord Krishna says, real heroes do not simply boast, but rather show their prowess in action. We cannot take seriously the words of one who is full of anxiety and who wants to die. Shukamarshi said, just as the wind covers the sun with clouds or a fire with dust, the son of Jara marched toward the two descendants of Madhu, and with his huge assemblage of armies surrounded them and their soldiers, chariots, flags, horses, and chariots. Acharya Sridhara points out that clouds only seem to cover the sun. The sun remains shining in the vast sky, nor is the potency of fire affected by thin covering of a dust. Similarly, the covering of Jarasandha's military strength was only apparent. Shukavacha Suparnataladvajayatotno Rata Valakshayantyo Hariramayor Striya Purattalaka Amyago Puraha Samashitaha Sammuhu Chucharditaha. This is the 21st sloka of the 50th chapter. The woman stood in the watchtowers, palaces, and high gates of the city. When they could no longer see Krishna and Balarama's chariots, identified by the banners marked with the emblems of Garuda and a palm tree, they were struck with grief and fainted. The women are especially mentioned here because of their extraordinary attachment to Lord Krishna and Lord Balarama. Seeing his army tormented by the relentless and savage rain of arrows from the massive opposing forces gather like clouds about him, Lord Hari twanged his excellent bow Saranga, which both gods and demons worship. Lord Krishna took arrows from his square, fixed them on the bowstring, pulled back, and released endless torrents of sharp shafts which struck the enemy's chariots elephants, horses, infantrymen. The Lord, shooting his arrows, resembled a blazing circle of fire. Elephants fell to the ground, their foreheads split open. Cavalry horses fell with severed necks. Chariots fell with their horses. Flags and drivers and masters all shattered, and foot soldiers collapsed, and with severed arms, thighs, and shoulders. On the battlefield, hundreds of rivers of blood flowed from the limbs of the humans, elephants, and horses who had been cut to pieces. In these rivers, arms resembled snakes, human heads, turtles, dead elephants, islands, and dead horses, and crocodiles. Hands and thighs appeared like fish, human hair like water waves, bows like waves, and various weapons like clumps and bushes. The rivers of God, the rivers of blood teemed with all of these. Chariot wheels looked like terrifying whirlpools, and precious gems and ornaments resembled stones and gravel in the rushing rivers, which aroused fear in the mind, joy in the wise. With the blows of his plow, chariot wheels looked like terrifying whirlpools, and precious gems and ornaments resembled stones and gravel in the rushing and red rivers, which aroused fear in the mind, joy in the wise. With the blows of his plow weapon, the immeasurably powerful Lord Balarqama destroyed Magadharaja's Jarasandha's military force, and though this force was unfathomable and fearsome as an impassionable ocean, for the two sons of Vasudeva, lords of the universe, the battle was hardly more than to play. For him who orchestrates and of the creations and maintenance and destruction of the three worlds, and who possesses unlimited spiritual qualities, is hardly amazing that he subdues an opposing party. Still, when the Lord does so, imitating human behavior, sages glorify his act. The philosopher Aristotle once argued that the supreme God would hardly take part in human activities, since all ordinary activities are unworthy of such a divine being. Similarly, Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti, who almost certainly never read the King's Aristotle, raises a similar point. Since the Krishna creates, maintains, and annihilates the entire universe, is not it an uninteresting mismatch when he fights against Jarasandha? The answer is as follows. The Lord plays the part of a human being, and expanding his pleasure potency creates thrilling transcendental pastimes full of suspense and dynamic action. By the Lord's Yogamaya potency, he appears exactly like a human being, and thus we may enjoy the spectacle of the Supreme Person acting in the earthly stage. Undoubtedly, stubborn agnostics will argue that since Krishna is God, there is no real suspense involved. Such skeptics simply do not understand Krishna's attractive potency, beauty, and drama. Even in the material stage, possess their own fascinating logic, and similarly, we love Krishna for his own sake. We appreciate his beauty for its own sake. We enjoy Krishna's pastimes because they are in fact wonderful in and themselves. In fact, Krishna executes his pastimes not for a mundane egoistical purpose, but for our pleasure. Thus the presentation of spiritual pastimes is itself an act of love that Krishna performs for the infinite spiritual happiness of pure-hearted souls who came transcendent material envy of the Godhead. In this regard, Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti quotes an important verse from the Gopala Tapani Upanishad. Narakriti para Brahma Karana Munaschaha. The Supreme Absolute Truth, for his own purpose, appears in human-like form, although he is the source of everything. Similarly, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we found Yan Mitram Parama Anandan Purnam Brahma Sanatanam, the source of transcendental bliss, the eternal supreme Brahman, has become their friend. Jarasandha, with his chariot, lost all his soldiers and dead, was left with only his breath. At that point, Lord Balarama forcibly seized the powerful warrior, just as one lion takes hold of another. With the divine noose of Varuna and other mortal ropes, Balarama began tying up Jarasandha, who had killed so many foes. But Lord Govinda still had a purpose to fulfill through Jarasandha, and thus he asked Balarama to stop him. The word Hataraktim means who has killed his enemies, or through whom his enemies would be killed. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti has provided this thoughtful note. Jarasandha, whom fighters had highly honored, was ashamed after being released by the two lords of the universe, and thus he decided to undergo penances. On the road, however, several kings convinced him with both spiritual wisdom and mundane arguments that he should give up his idea of self-abnegation. They told him, "Your defeat of the Pandavas was simply the unavoidable reaction of your past karma." That's what his friend said, Jarasandha's friend. But Lord Krishna knows Jarasandha has to be killed by Bhima in the next few months later. That's why Lord Krishna is leaving him alive until he brings Kalayavana. All of his armies having been killed and himself neglected by the personality of Godhead, King Jarasandha, son of Brihadratha, then sadly returned to the kingdom of Magadha. That's where he belongs to. Lord Mukunda had crossed the ocean of his enemy's armies with his own military force completely intact. He received congratulations from the denizens of heaven, who showered him with flowers from the heaven. The people of Mathura, relieved of their feverish anxiety and filled with joy, came out to meet him as professional bards and heralds, and panegyrics sang in praise of his victory. So Lord Krishna and Balarama won the war against Jarasandha, but he left Jarasandha unharmed. As the Lord entered his city, conch shells and kettle drums sounded, and many drums, horns, reenas, flutters, and madigas played in concert. The boulevards were sprinkled with water. There were banners everywhere, and the gateway were decorated with celebration. The citizens were elated, and the city sounded with chanting of Vedic hymns. As the women of the city affectionately looked at the Lord, their eyes wide open with love, they scattered flower garlands, yogurt, parched rice, and newly grown sprouts upon him. All this is taking place as Lord Krishna enters the city of Mathura after the war with Jarasandha. Lord Krishna then presented to the Yadu king all the wealth had fallen in the battlefield, namely the countless ornaments of the dead warriors. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti adds that jeweled ornaments had also been collected from the horses and other animals. What might be added here for the sake of this skirmish is that Jarasandha came to Mathura with a clear intention of slaughtering every lost man in the city, including Krishna and Balarama. It is out of the causeless mercy of the Lord that he gives the conditioned souls a taste of their own medicine, and thus helps them become more sensitive to the laws of nature and the existence of supreme Godhead. Ultimately, Krishna awarded Jarasandha and others killed on the battlefield spiritual liberation. The Lord is strict, but he is not malicious. In fact, he is an ocean of mercy. We came to the Shloka 41. Ayo dhanagatam vittamanantam veerabhushanam yadurajaya tat sarva mahrutam pradita prabhu. 17 times the king of Magadha, Jarasandha, meet a defeat in this very way. And yet, throughout these defeats, he fought on with his Akshoini divisions of army against the forces of Yadu dynasty who were protected by Lord Krishna. By the power of Lord Krishna, the Vrishnis would invariably annihilate all of Jarasandha's forces. When all his soldiers had been killed, the king released by his enemies would again go away. Just as the 18th battle was about to take place, a barbarian warrior named Kalayavana, sent by Narada, appeared on the battlefield. Arriving at Mathura, this Kalayavana laid siege to the city with 30 million barbarian soldiers. He had never found a human rival worth fighting, but he had heard that the Vrishnis were his equals. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti quotes from the Vishnu Purana concerning the history of Kalayavana. Once Gargya Muni has ridiculed by his brother-in-law as a eunuch. And when the Yadavas heard this, they laughed heartily, infuriated by their laughter. Gargya Muni became angry, set out for the south, thinking, "May I have a son who will bring terror to the Yadavas." He worshipped Lord Mahadeva, eating powdered iron, and after 12 years obtained his desired benediction, elated, he returned home. Later, when the childless king of Yavanas requested a son from him, Gargya begot in the Yavana's wife a son, Kalayavana. Gargya begot in the Yavana's wife a son, Kalayavana. Kalayavana processed the fury of Lord Shiva in his aspect of Mahakala. Once the Kalayavana asked Narada, "Who are now the strongest kings in the earth?" Narada replied that the Yadus were. Thus sent Narada, Kalayavanas appeared at Mathura. When Lord Krishna and Lord Shankarshana, that is Balarama, saw Kalayavana, Krishna thought about the situation and said, "Oh, great danger now threatens the Yadus from the two sides." We may note here that although Sri Krishna had defeated Jarasandha 17 times against tremendous odds, he did not immediately annihilate the army of Kalayavana, thus keeping intact the benediction granted to Gargya by Lord Shiva as explained in the previous purport. This Kalayavana is besieging us already, and the mighty king of Magadha will soon arrive here, if not today, then tomorrow or the next day. If powerful Jarasandha comes while we too are busy fighting Kalayavana, Jarasandha may kill our relatives or else take them away to his capital. This was the worry Krishna had it in their mind. Therefore, we will immediately construct fortress that no human force can penetrate. Let us settle our family members there and then kill the barbarian king. So, after thus discussing the matter with Balarama, the Supreme Personality of Godhead had fortress 12 yojanas in circumference built within the sea. Inside that fort, he had city, in a city built containing all kinds of wonderful things. In the construction of the city could be seen the full scientific knowledge and architectural skill of Viswakarma. There were wide avenues, commercial roads, and courtyards laid out on the ample plots of land. There were splendid parks and also gardens stocked with the trees and creepers from the heavenly planets. The gateway towers were topped with golden turrets touching the sky, and their upper levels were fashioned of crystal quartz. The gold-covered houses were adorned in front with the golden parts and on the top with the jeweled roofs, and their floors were inlaid with the precious emeralds. Beside the house stood treasury buildings, warehouses, and stables of fine horses, all built of silver and brass. Each residence had a watchtower and also a temple for its household deity, filled with the citizens of all four special orders all social orders, the city was especially beautified by the palaces of Sri Krishna, the Lord of the Yadus. So Lord Krishna asked Vishwakarma to build a Dwarka city. So Vishwakarma built a city. Srila Sridhara Swami explains that the state highways, Rathaya, were in front and the secondary roads, Vitaya, behind, and between them are courtyards, Chatavrani. Within these courtyards were surrounding walls, and within the walls stood golden residences, atop which shone crystal watchtowers crowned with golden parts. Thus, the buildings were multi-storied. The word Vastu indicates that the houses and buildings were constructed on ample plots of land with a plenty of room for green areas. Lord Indra brought Sri Krishna the Sudharma assembly hall, standing within which a mortal man is not subject to the laws of mortality. Indra also gave the Parijata tree. Lord Varuna offered horses as swift as the mind, some of which were pure dark blue, others white. The treasurer of the demigods, Kubera, gave these 8 mystic treasuries, and the rulers of various planets each presented their own opulences. Srila Sridhara Swami comments as follows on this verse. The master of the treasury is Kubera, and the 8 treasurers are his nidhis. These are described as follows. The 8 mystic treasures are called Padma, Mahapadma, Matsya, Kurma, Audaka, Neela, Mukunda, and Shankha. The Supreme Lord, having come to the earth, O King, these gods now offered him whatever powers of control he had previously delegated to them for the exercise of their particular authority. After transporting all his subjects to the new city, Dwarka, by the power of his mystic Yogamaya, Lord Krishna consulted with Lord Balarqama, who had remained in Mathura to protect them. Then, wearing a garland of lotuses but bearing no weapons, Lord Krishna went out to Mathura by his main gate. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti quote the following verses from Sri Padma Purana, Uttarakanda, to describe how Lord Krishna transferred the citizens from Mathura to Dwarka. In the middle of the night, as the citizens of Mathura slept, Lord Janardana suddenly removed them from that city and placed them in Dwarka. When the men awoke, they were all amazed to find themselves, their children, and their wives sitting inside palaces made of gold. Thus end the purports of the humble servants of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to the 10th canto, 50th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Krishna Establishes City of Dwarka. So we covered the Mahabhagavad Purana, we finished the Purvarddha, and we started the Uttarardha. The first chapter of the Uttarardha is 50th chapter. In this 50th chapter, Lord Krishna defeated Jarasandha many times, and the last time, before the 18th time he is coming, he noticed the Kalayavana there, so the tough fighting, and to protect his family and Yadu dynasty, he created a new city called Dwarka by help of Viswakarma. He is the architect of the heaven. He built the new city called Dwarka for the welfare of Yadu dynasty and for Krishna. So thus ends the 50th chapter. Om Namostu Anantaya Sahasramurtaye Sahasrapadakshirabhave Sahasranamne Purusharthaye Sahasrakoti Yugadharane Namaha Akashat Patitamyadagat Sagram Sarvadeva Namaskaraha Sri Keshvam Pragatyo Namaha Sarvamedeshat Punyam Sarvadeshat Punyam Tatparam Pramopti Bhapanath Vasudevasya Bhastante Jagatrayam Sarvabhutanevasvasi Vasudevnuste Kaya Namacha Mansendreva Buddhatmanama Pragate Svava Karomi Yadyat Sagalam Parasmai Narayanaye Samarpayami. Narayanaye Samarpayami. Tomorrow we are going to read the 51st chapter, the deliverance of Muchukunda. Muchukunda Moksha. Muchukunda Moksha is the 51st chapter we are going to read tomorrow. Namo Namo Namo.